What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Drivy, and welcome to another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated lists from large events of the past week. And oh my god, is this a big one, because we had multiple of those large events occur this week. This included not only the US Open Tacoma, a official Warhammer 40k event run by their events team that drew over 430 players to a single event, but also the Frontline Gaming Lone Star Open, another 200 plus player super major. So lots to talk about this week and a ton of results to sift through. As always, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members that you can join in the join link down below the video, and Twitch subscribers, all of whom help support me creating all of this Warhammer 40k content. I really appreciate everyone. And let's dive into a metagame breakdown. Orcs are coming in hot this week with two undefeated results, both at the USO Tacoma and at the Lone Star Open. Those two large super major events that we just discussed both had undefeated Orc players, and we are going to be talking about both of those Orc lists because, oh boy, are they absolutely wild. As is expected, Drukhari has also done fairly well, going undefeated both at the Saskatchewan Open as well as the Baltic Cup. Adepta Sororitas also continues their domination over the metagame with two undefeated results at RopeCon as well as the TLMX Layton. Space Marines also had a fairly good showing, specifically in Codex non-compliant chapters. Unfortunately, the Codex compliant chapters did not do quite as well this week, although we did see Blood Angels go undefeated also at the RopeCon event and Dark Angels at the Baltic Cup. Chaos Space Marines, going back to Lone Star Open, did well. That was with a Chaos cult, the likes of which we have seen in the past, and we'll be talking about that one. Tyranids also at the Lone Star Open as well with an undefeated result. Aeldari at the TLMX Layton, and I want to shout out to that event because that was Jack Harpster running an Aeldari list, and Quentin Johnson with the undefeated Adepta Sororitas list. Art of War basically just swept that event, so shout out to Team Art of War for killing it over there. World Eaters also undefeated at the Saskatchewan Open. Adeptus Mechanicus undefeated with an excellent result at the Dice Arcade Winter. Tau Empire took down the Fourth Valley GT, and last but certainly not least, Chaos Demons also undefeated at the Baltic Cup. Lots of large events this week, so that's why we see a lot of repeat tournaments on this record. A lot of these events had so many players that they ended up with multiple undefeated players by the end of the tournament. What is interesting to see this week is that the metagame has less of a sort of impacted result as we have been seeing in the previous week since the launch of the format. Previously, we saw a couple factions with the predominance of undefeated lists. This time, we are looking at a larger sample size, and we are seeing more factions from those lower tiers go undefeated, which is super awesome to see, and continues the trend that I think 10th edition, at least in 2024, is coming out with. Certainly one of the most balanced and interesting metagames that Warhammer 40k has ever had. So with that, let's dive in and start talking about some lists. First up, we have Orcs. We'll start with the USO Tacoma and their number one placement, Marshall Peterson, going undefeated with a War Horde. For those who want to see this list and the event in action, this was streamed over on the official Warhammer channel, and those VODs, at least at time of recording, are open for the public to watch. So if you want to go check out those results, you can go over to their Twitch channel. Marshall was running Boss Snickrot, as well as Gaskell Thraka, and a standard War Boss. Those were being backed up by 3 units of Beast Snagga Boys. Those 3 Beast Snagga Boy units were each jumping into one of the list's 3 kill rigs. The kill rigs are a super flexible profile. They have a pretty effective ranged attack and auto-hitting las cannon equivalent profile, which is excellent, and a ton of melee attacks that they can buff either with themselves or the units around them with +1 strength or potential lethal hits with their psychic power. This is a huge force multiplication effect for both the Beast Snagga Boys and the other infantry units in the army. We also had a single truck, probably to carry around the 2 units of 5 flash kits in the army, a battle wagon equipped with a hard case, probably to carry around the unit's knobs, as well as a unit of 2 mega knobs to attach onto Gaskell Thraka to protect him as he moves up the table, and 2 units of Storm Boys. Overall, a relatively standard Orc list. It's nice to see War Horde back on the menu after the changes made in the June update to the other detachments that Orcs had access to. Green Tide and Bully Boys both saw some changes specifically to the units inside them, although Green Tide also obviously had changes to its core mechanics, but War Horde remained relatively untouched, and without and beyond a couple of minor nerfs to things like Mega Knobs, the core of the list is still strong and clearly continuing to do well. Moving on, however, we have a much spicier list from the master of the meme himself, Clifton Russell, who rocked a Dread Mob at the Lone Star Open. Now, the Lone Star Open was streamed by our friends over at War Games Live, and the event ended with 3 undefeated lists, one of them being this insane Dread Mob list. Clifton was running 3 shock attack gun equipped Big Mechs, one of them with the Gitfinder goggles to give his unit ignore cover. That's a big deal for the Ludas that these guys normally attach into, but also for the Big Mechs themselves, since the shock attack gun Big Mechs giving their unit access to press that button, as well as getting rerolls from attaching into Ludas, are really the damage dealer of a Dread Mob army. We had 100 Gretchin in this list. That's right, 5 units of 20 of them. Dread Mob makes these guys battle line, which is why you're able to take 100 of them. And they also have probably the game's most effective reactive move, a flat 6-inch move that also damages the unit triggering it. The downside, obviously, is that you can only use it on Gretchin units, but when you are flooding the table with endless numbers of Gretchin that are running up the table, stealing objectives, charging into enemies to tie them up, and just generally being a nuisance, this thing is gonna get so much value. The list also included 3 units of flash kits, 10 in each of those for an immense amount of shooting. That's backing up the 3 units of 10 Ludas that the Big Mechs are attaching into, as well as 3 units of mech guns, these guys with bubble chukkas to act as longer ranged firepower, and some utility units into units of 5 Storm Boys. Clifton has been on this channel quite a few times with his absolute insane meme lists, and this one is definitely a chip off the old block. This list looks incredible, just flooding the board with infinite numbers of light infantry and backing that up with pretty solid shooting from the Dread Mob units. And it's really cool to see creative lists like this go undefeated in this format. Now with that, let's move on to the Saskatchewan Open. We can talk about Anthony Richardson's Drukhari. Anthony was running a Sky Splinter Assault led by a trio of Archons, one of them with the Nightmare Shroud to make his unit unoverwatchable, plus a Beastmaster as well as Lilith Hesperax. We had a unit of witches for Lilith to join into, and a Cabalite Warrior squad alongside a Court of the Archon. Following that up were also 2 units of Incubi, a unit of 5 and a unit of 10 that the remaining 2 Archons could hop into, and that gives the list a little bit of flexibility. You do have 1 potential big shooting brick, up to 10 Cabalites, unless you split them out with combat squatting off of a Venom, alongside a Court of the Archon, so the Archon can grant all of those models wound rerolls on their ranged attacks. That's very effective, but then you also have 2 units that can make use of Sky Splinter Assaults insane buffs to melee units, buffing those 2 Incubi bricks. For utility, we also had 3 units of Mandrakes, and that was backed up with some shooting from 3 Ravagers, alongside a lot of pain token regeneration from a trio of Cronus. It's interesting to see 3 Cronuses on the table, but for only 50 points apiece, they're actually a relatively resilient profile, which is kind of nice. They don't really do that much damage, but they refund your pain tokens, and they can also sit on objectives if you really need them to, and sort of act as utility, so I definitely understand the inclusion. Interestingly, we didn't really have any Scourges in this list, preferring to focus on those vehicles and infantry bricks instead. Now that moves us on to Adepta Sororitas, and we're going to move to the TLMX Layton, where Quentin Johnson went undefeated with the faction, a Bringers of the Flame detachment. Quentin was running a Canoness with a jump pack with Fire and Fury. There was a 10 model Seraphim squad for that Canoness to jump into, with 8 Hand Flamers equipped to that, getting all of those bonuses from Fire and Fury for the additional attacks that could then be comboed into Devastating Wounds with the Devastating Wound stratagem in the detachment. I have an entire video about how much damage that can do, and it is incredibly solid. We also had a single Dialogus plus Morvenfall and the Triumph of St. Catherine. The Dialogus is a nice inclusion. It can jump into one of the infantry squads, a Battle Sister squad if you have one, but potentially either a Dominion squad as well. And you can siphon Miracle Dice into that unit to turn into automatic 6s thanks to the Dialogus. If you're standing next to the Triumph of St. Catherine to give you 2 uses of Acts of Faith, you can do that twice in a single shooting attack, which gives you 2 automatic hits or 2 automatic wounds with that unit, or even potentially 2 automatic 6s for damage, which makes the Dialogus unit incredibly strong. On top of that, the Dialogus is also just a 30-point character with a solid saving throw, and they oftentimes, especially if you don't have too many characters in your army, so you're not worried about just granting your opponent free assassination, can be used as a utility unit themselves, just put into strategic reserve to jump off a table edge, or placed in the center of the table in order to score secondaries. The army was backed up by 3 Immolators, those all equipped with multi-meltas, and those combat squadding one half of one of 3 Dominion squads, with 3 units of Dominions, all of those equipped with melta guns, plus a Paragon Warsuit unit for Morven Vault to join into, and 3 Castigators, all of those equipped with autocannons. I appreciate kind of the symmetry of this list. There were 3 Immolators, 3 Castigators, 3 Dominion squads, and then 1 Paragon unit and 1 Seraphim squad, and that was basically the entire list. It's very simple, very straightforward, and obviously incredibly powerful. Now, the only other faction to have multiple undefeated players this week was Space Marines, one with Blood Angels and one with Dark Angels. Juha Otellan went undefeated with Blood Angels. At the RopeCon GT, this was a Sons of Sanguinius detachment running Lamarties and 2 Sanguinary Priests with jump packs. This was a pretty interesting list because it included a 5-model Sanguinary Guard squad, which was probably running without a character since Lamarties was the army's warlord, so the Sanguinary Guard wouldn't get a huge bonus from having a character attached. They were likely just a relatively resilient problem solver unit, but we had 20 Death Company, 2 units of 5 and 1 unit of 10 with jump packs, alongside 3 jump pack Assault Intercessor squads and a standard Assault Intercessor squad, plus 2 Scout squads to act as utility, and interestingly, 2 Vanguard veteran units with jump packs. That was likely where the 2 Sanguinary Priests were going. They make these units relatively difficult to kill since you're fighting through a Storm Shield 4+ Invulnerable save, plus a 5+ Feel No Pain from the attached Sanguinary Priest. The Sanguinary Priest can also then buff their kind of atrocious AP of 1 up to AP 2, which is nice as well. And with the bonuses that these guys get on the charge from the Sons of Sanguinius detachment ability, they actually can scythe through a lot of stuff. And given the fact that they are mass, pretty high value 1 damage attacks, they can punch through a lot of defensive technology. -1 damage, half damage, all of that stuff doesn't work on these guys. So if that's something that you're worried about, if you're worried about killing Lamarties attached Death Company units or Redemptor Dreadnoughts in other Space Marine lists, for example, these guys will just cut right through them. This is another list that's incredibly straightforward and I guess very Blood Angels. It has an insane number of jump pack infantry. This is something like 60 jump pack infantry that's just going to run at you and hit you with swords. And you're probably going to die. And, you know, turns out that works pretty well. Moving over to the Baltic Cup, Niklas Frerix went undefeated with Dark Angels running a Gladius Task Force. We've been seeing varieties of Gladius Task Force Dark Angels crop up over the last couple weeks, and I don't think they're going anywhere fast. These armies are very good, and the bonuses that the Gladius Task Force has synergize exceptionally well with the newly improved weapon profiles that Dark Angels bring to them. The army had an Apothecary Biologus with Fire Discipline, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, as well as 2 Epic Heroes, both Azrael and the Primarch Lionel Johnson. Johnson, having a ridiculously solid Fight First profile, is an incredibly strong heroic intervention threat. Aggressive melee armies, which are so popular right now, absolutely hate to see this guy because he will sit next to these very defensive bricks that the Dark Angels are bringing, and anything that is coming to engage them has the potential of being heroically intervened for 1 CP and just cut down before they're able to swing, which is not really a risk that any melee army can take. The army also included a 5-model Intercessor squad, as well as 2 units of 5 Assault Intercessors with jump packs, and 2 Scout squads to act as utility. We had a Repulsor, which with its newly improved transport capacity could embark a 6-model Aggressor squad alongside the Apothecary Biologus with that Fire Discipline combo to deliver those guys to the battlefield. Those aggressors obviously with their Fragstorm grenade launchers to give them an incredible attack volume with 5-up critical hits thanks to that Fire Discipline during the Devastator Doctrine. We then had 2 units of Deathwing Knights. These guys can overcome their normally slow speed with a good timing of Assault Doctrine and do some pretty serious damage, equipped with maces this time around, alongside an Inner Circle Companion squad. This is a really good inclusion for Azrael specifically. The downside of the Inner Circle Companions, despite the fact that they have good attack profiles and solid defenses, since they can be -1 to be hit when they're attached with a character, is that they don't have an invulnerable save. Fortunately, Azrael shores up that problem by giving them an invulnerable save, so they give him a relatively tanky, super high damage output bunker that he can hide in. And he also gives them sustained hits, which is going to affect their sweep attacks, which come in with lethal hits as standard, but obviously get a huge benefit from getting both lethal and sustained hits. And with Honor of the Chapter, you can get +1 AP on those guys and +1 to wound, so those sustained hits can convert more often, and these guys can do absolutely insane damage in melee. I really like these Gladius Task Force builds, especially out of Dark Angels. They have so many really powerful and tanky melee options between the Inner Circle Companions, the Deathwing Knights, and all of that being protected by Lionel Johnson. And on top of that, they can also use the Gladius Task Force's standard normal assignment of really strong ranged attacks as well, being able to use that Fire Discipline and the Repulsor to keep the enemy's heads down while you're trying to get those Terminators and those slower melee units engaged. These lists are absolutely rad. I think that they play to the Dark Angel strengths much better than the Lionstorm varieties of lists that we've seen in the past, and I'm so excited that they're continuing to see success. Now let's move over to a similar faction in Chaos Space Marines. Derek Apshe went undefeated with Chaos Space Marines at the Lone Star Open, rocking a Chaos Cult. This included Cypher, a Dark Apostle with the Amulet of Tainted Vigor. This is the enhancement that allows the unit to regenerate an additional D3 destroyed models in each of your command phases. That was alongside 2 Dark Communes, one of them with Incendiary Goad, which gives the unit +1 strength as well as a potential +1 attack if it is below half strength, and the last with Warped Foresight, which gives the character and its attached unit the 6-inch scout ability. This potentially allows you to attach a Dark Commune, which the enhancement was assigned to, into a Accursed Cultist unit and restore their 6-inch scout, since the Dark Commune doesn't have the 6-inch scout baked in, and actually then removes it from any unit that it attaches into. We also saw Fabius Bile in the list just as a little bit of an independent operator. He's not an actual lone operative, but he is hard enough to kill that nobody really wants to attack him. He can blank damage and regenerate himself, which makes him super duper difficult to kill in a single round of shooting, almost impossible, and very difficult to kill even over a full turn. Now on top of that, we were running an absolute insane number of cultists, 5 units of 10 standard Chaos Cultists, as well as 6 units of 10 Traitor Guardsmen. Just a ludicrous number of these guys. We were able to protect a couple of those in a Chaos Rhino, and the characters could attach into 3 Accursed Cultist squads alongside some allies, a unit of Seekers in order to absolutely dominate the middle of the table with their long scout move, plus a unit of Chaos Spawn, a unit of Nurglings, and a Demonette unit. Now I've talked about this list in the past. After we first started to see Derek do well with his Chaos Cult. The Chaos Cult actually has a sort of insane damage output once you start to apply all of its buffs. Obviously, you can get that +1 strength and potential +1 attack from Incendiary Goad. Yeah, and you can further compound that with stratagems affecting basically every step of the attack sequence. That allows these Accursed Cultist units to, once they're fully comboed out, kill almost any unit in the game. But on top of that, you're also running almost 200 models up the table, especially in small chunks of 10, which is a style of army that's very difficult to deal with. There aren't a lot of units in the game that can super efficiently kill 10 models to the man, and having a single Chaos Cultist alive can oftentimes mean that they will retain whatever objective they're sitting on. The Chaos Cultists themselves also being able to secure those objectives and lock them in under the Chaos player's control makes this army incredibly difficult to prevent from outscoring you, and the fact that they have an insane number of units just taking over the table also makes them good at scoring secondaries and body blocking enemies from getting up the table themselves. Armies like these are very effective in Pariah Nexus because of some of the terrain layouts that allow melee units to stage up the table and require very specific styles of enemy armies to actually deal with them. And if you're not able to kill the enormous number of tiny units that the Chaos Cult brings to the table, things are not going to go well for you. Now, staying with the Lone Star Open, we had one remaining undefeated list from the event. This was Nathaniel Bjorg's Vanguard Onslaught Tyranids. Now, of course, it's my luck that a list with 3 Broodlords in it releases literally the same day where I release a tier list where I slag off the Broodlord for being too expensive, and immediately it goes undefeated at one of the biggest events of the weekend. So maybe I need to reevaluate my thoughts on the Broodlord. I don't know, but I'll give it a go, and we'll see how it goes. Nathaniel was running a Vanguard Onslaught, including, like I said, 3 Broodlords alongside 3 units of 10 Genestealers to attach them into. The Death Leaper, a Neuro Tyrant with the Neuro Node to allow units to redeploy before the game begins, and this is before the first turn roll-off. This actually does have a little bit of synergy with the mass Genestealer builds. Since you aren't able to redeploy units after knowing who goes first, what you can do is react to your opponent's attempts to screen you. Genestealers have a very long scout move, and one of the typical ways to defend against those scouts is to put infiltrators in front of them. So with the Neuro Node, you can start the Genestealers up in the center of the table, force your opponent to very aggressively deploy their infiltrators to stop you from scouting, and then simply redeploy the Genestealers somewhere else before you roll to go first. Then after the roll to go first, scout the Genestealers anyway. That's some pretty good counter technology, and if you do go first, give the Genestealers something to do on the first turn because they could just go kill all your opponent's infiltrators. We also had a chameleonic winged hive tyrant, so it has a stealth baked in thanks to that enhancement and is always in cover, as well as a winged Tyranid prime to attach into one unit of melee Tyranid warriors. These guys are ridiculously powerful in a Vanguard Onslaught detachment. I have a whole video where we math out exactly how much damage this unit does once it's fully comboed out, and the answer is quite a lot. And with the ability to advance and charge, thanks to that attached Tyranid prime, these guys can go fairly fast and get that melee profile engaged much quicker. In addition to that, we also had 2 lictors as well as 2 neurolictors to act as utility and buff the army, 1 unit of Von Ryan's Leapers to be an infiltrating unit that could block off enemy infiltrators that could potentially stifle the Genestealers from moving up the table where they want to. The Von Ryan's Leapers also having free heroic interventions as well as fight first are a good counter to enemy melee armies, which is great in a metagame where we see a lot of units like Blood Angels, World Eaters, and Orcs apparently doing very well, alongside 2 units of 6 Raveners. Now the Raveners are superlative infantry sweepers. They're very fast, and especially now that they have the Vanguard Invader keyword, they can zip around the table, and they have a natural downy-uppy effect. They can go into strategic reserve at the end of your opponent's turn and then deep strike back on the table later on. So they're good as a utility unit, they're good at dealing damage, and especially once you battle shock enemies and start to get the Neurolictor aura in play alongside the +1 strength from the Synapse ability as well. Raveners can put out a ludicrous number of attacks. Downside is that their AP is not that great, but if they're punching into low or medium AP stuff, or you don't have access to Armor of Contempt or something like that, Raveners can tear up basically any target in the game in the right circumstances. And given the fact that they're super cheap and will almost always get to grips with what they want to, that's incredibly strong. Another benefit that an army like this has is the sheer number of bodies that is going to be ramming down your opponent's throat. While each of these units can deal significant but maybe not back-breaking damage individually, an army dealing with essentially 6 or 7 of them between the 3 Genestealer units, the Tyranid Warrior unit, the 2 Ravener units, and all the independent units like the Von Ryan's Leapers, the Lictors, and the Neurolictors is eventually going to run out of steam. And even if you can force them to respect the Genestealer's threat range, deploy their stuff far back, and then constantly move block them or pin them into areas by using those aggressive melee units, you can oftentimes prevent armies from being able to compete with the Vanguard Onslaught on objectives. That is a classic trope that we've seen from this detachment in the past, and it's even stronger now that the Tyranid melee profiles have been buffed. Now let's move back to the TLM X Leighton and talk about the other Art of War member who went undefeated this week, Jack Harbster with Aeldari. Jack was running a battle host led by an Autarch Wayleaper with the Phoenix Gem. The list also included Yvraine and the Vizarch. Yvraine was not the Warlord in this case, so we're not playing a Ynnari army. We are squarely in the Craft Worlds sub-faction to unlock that additional CP generation from the Autarch Wayleaper. The Vizarch is an interesting inclusion in these armies. He gives his attached unit fights first, and he can combo attach with Yvraine. The Vizarch himself giving the unit a little bit more offensive output with that fight first ability and his own really effective melee profile. He has 5 AP for 2 damage attacks that can gain either sustained 2, devastating wounds, or lethal hits each time he attacks, and with Strains of Fate dice and battle focus rerolls, you can fairly effectively trigger those critical effects. Yvraine also then makes the unit significantly harder to kill with 5+ Feel No Pain and the ability to regenerate bodyguard models back to the unit. She also brings another 5 AP3 2 damage attacks with devastating wounds, and all of those will get +1 to wound from the Harlequin troop itself. This unit brings a ton of offensive melee damage to the table that also acts as a good heroic intervention threat thanks to that fight first from the Vizarch. We also then had a Death Gesture with Fate's Messenger to auto-convert dice into 6s to trigger the effects of its Shrieker Cannon, either the devastating wounds on the wound roll or the sustain 3 on the hit roll, plus a Farseer Skyrunner with the Weeping Stones in order to give his unit the ability to generate Fate dice when they destroy things. That guy's going to attach into a unit of 6 Wind Riders with Shuriken Cannons, which can also act as a good outlet for Fire and Fade. They can pop out, shoot something down with all of the buffs from the combined Farseers, generate new Fate dice from Weeping Stones, and then jump back behind terrain with the Stratagem in order to dodge enemy counterfire. That's buffed even further by an attached Warlock Skyrunner, who brings a Torrent as well as a couple additional Shuriken Catapult attacks to the unit, alongside Ignore Cover from his Runes of Battle. On top of that, we had a unit of Guardian Defenders, 1 unit of 5 Rangers, and 1 unit of 5 Swooping Hawks in order to act as utility, plus 3 units of Warp Spiders, because Warp Spiders are great. That's a lot of utility units backing setting up those two big bricks with multiple attached characters, the Harlequin Troop and the Wind Riders. Good play with those big bricks can see them operate effectively in multiple turns and get tons and tons of value. Then you can score with these smaller 5-model units and roll that out into a win. I should also mention there's an Avatar of Cain in this list, probably. That's also an important thing to keep in mind, because that gives the list a good solid anvil that's difficult to take down and can actually hold table space better than the rest of the list. Now moving on and talking about taking table space, let's move back to the Saskatchewan Open and Fraser Perry's World Eaters. Fraser took a relatively standard Berserker warband to the event, going undefeated using Angron, Karn the Betrayer, attached to a unit of Khorne Berserkers, probably a unit of 5, alongside Lord Invocatus and a Master of Executions with the Berserker Glaive. That guy probably attached into the other Khorne Berserker unit. There was also a unit of 10 in there as well. Those guys embarked into a World Eaters Rhino, and we also saw 3 units of 3 Exalted 8-bound and 2 units of 3 Standard 8-bound plus 2 Chaos Spawn to make up the remainder of the list. Relatively standard World Eaters stuff this time around, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and just keep hitting people with chainswords. Moving over to the Dice Arcade Winter, that one was taken down by Alexander Engelzoss, who went undefeated with an Adeptus Mechanicus Skitarii Hunter cohort. Alexander was running 2 Skitarii Marshals, one of them with the Cantic Thrall Net, to allow you to make use of multiple of your Doctrina Imperatives, which can potentially be pointed at some of the long-range guns in the army, allowing them to get the ranged benefits from Protector Imperative, while also buffing your more offensive melee stuff with the melee effects of Conqueror Imperative at the same time. We also had a Battlesphere Upthing Skitarii Marshal to give his unit a shoot and scoot ability, 1 unit of Skitarii Rangers, and 3 units of Skitarii Vanguard. Those guys could embark into one of the 2 Scorpius Dune Riders. We also had 2 units of Iron Strider Balistari, 2 units of Sidonian Dragoons to make up the bulk of the list, a unit of Sicarian Rust Stalkers to act as an aggressive melee unit, 2 units of Sicarian Infiltrators, as well as 2 units of Cerberus Raiders to act as forward operators and utility units, plus a Calidus Assassin to bring up the rear. We've seen Skitarii Hunter cohorts like this fairly often in the past, and they've gotten even better with the new updates to Adeptus Mechanicus, which made units like those Sicarian Rust Stalkers way more effective, especially with their ability to advance and charge, get huge buffs when they're standing near battle line units, alongside potentially +1 to hit in melee and their additional attacks. Similar things go for the Sidonian Dragoons that can take up the middle of the table with Feel No Pains from the detachment as well. Moving on from that, we also saw Tau Empire do fairly well, Ryan Kerr taking them to an undefeated record at the 4th Valley GT. Ryan was running a Retaliation Cadre, the battlesuit-focused detachment from Tau Empire. I wonder if one thing that was keeping this detachment a little depressed in the Leviathan format was the fact that it immediately, basically instantaneously gave your opponent a maximum score on Bring It Down. The downside of the Leviathan Bring It Down secondary objective card was that each time you killed a vehicle model, it scored you points. In Pariah Nexus, now you have to kill vehicle units, and as a result, we can see Ryan taking enormous numbers of battlesuits. This list included 2 Fire Knife battlesuit teams, those guys equipped with missile pods, alongside 3 Star Scythe battlesuit teams, all of those equipped with Tau Flamers, and a unit of Sunforge battlesuits as well. A total of 6 battlesuit units for 18 total battlesuits on the table. Those were being led by some combination of Commander Farsight, a Cold Star commander, and an Enforcer commander with the Starflare ignition system to give his unit a single redeployment once per game, going up into Deep Strike and then returning back to the table. In order to actually take the center of the table, we had 3 Riptide battlesuits, as well as a Ghost Kill battlesuit, plus 2 act as utility and spotters, 3 stealth battlesuits, and last but certainly, I don't know, maybe least, but 2 Crutox Riders because they're wildly cheap. This list looks like an absolute nightmare to play against. The Riptide and Ghost Kill battlesuits can stand out in the open and trade shots with most enemies while remaining relatively intact and protected by the Retaliation Cadre stratagems. All the while, you have 18 battlesuits, 21 if you include the characters, running around your backline, deep striking or fire and fading with missile pods. And given the fact that there are very few infantry in this list, unlike many lists that are relying on breacher teams or other light infantry units, where you can point that small arms fire to take it down, basically everything in this list is either a light. So if you have a predominance of strength 4 light shooting that's meant to clear infantry, that's basically not doing anything. You can maybe plink the armor of a Crisis battlesuit, but the rest of those shots are going wide. This skew is clearly effective. The amount of maneuverability it has with the stratagems that you get in Retaliation Cadre make it incredibly bouncy and hard to pin down, and obviously incredibly effective. Now that moves us back to the Baltic Cup for the last list of the week. This is Niklas Fritzchen, who went undefeated with a demonic incursion. That's right, Baltic Cup was kind of a trip. Two of the undefeated lists were both Niklas Fritzchen and Niklas Frerichs. You might get those two players' names confused, but you definitely won't get their armies confused, because this Niklas was rocking Chaos Demons led by Be'lakor. It's interesting to see Be'lakor back on the table after the changes to Chaos Demons in the June update. He hasn't really been seeing play too much in this faction since all of the Greater Demons got a lesser version of his ability to count everything in 6 inches of him as Shadow of Chaos. However, what he does do is he allows you to take a multi-allegiance army much more effectively, since the one thing that Be'lakor can do is hop up into the sky and drop down with another Greater Demon or a unit of infantry next to him, regardless of what allegiance keywords that infantry has. Other Greater Demons have to only bring in demons that share their own god keyword, so Be'lakor makes the list a little bit more flexible. We also saw a lot of ranged attacks in this list. The list was bringing both Kairos Fateweaver and a Lord of Change. Be'lakor allows those to engage in ranged fights with other factions, typically turns on the aura that makes enemies unable to target units within 6 inches of him unless they're within 18 inches. That makes it very difficult for those big Greater Demons to take damage early. It's also a Keeper of Secrets in the army, as well as a bunch of infantry that can counterpunch and attack enemies that get up in that distance incredibly easily. Kairos Fateweaver is such an interesting inclusion. He got the Lord of Deceit updated rule, so he can now increase the cost of stratagems within 12 inches of him instead of only using his ability once per game. Despite that, he has had a nerf to his weapon because it is indirect fire, so firing indirectly, he actually sort of gets an additional -1 to hit. However, if he's firing it directly, which it seems like most of the time he is, he can make the demon army much more effective at close range engagement, since he messes with their command point economy if they're trying to use defensive stratagems against him. That can all then be buffed by the Mask of Slaanesh that's also in the list, which can potentially be giving enemy units -1 to wound, who could also buff the output of that Keeper of Secrets, and the list has a ton of utility. 2 units of Screamers, which are ludicrously fast beasts that can jump up the table and complete early game secondaries super easily. A unit of Pink Horrors to act as a super resilient objective grabber, plus a unit of Plague Bearers to lock in objectives, and 2 units of Nurglings, 2 units of Demonettes, which are seen more and more often as very fast OC2 units that can trade for objectives. With the more condensed layouts in Pariah Nexus, they can run up into positions where they can charge onto your opponent's objectives in future turns very effectively, and they're cheap enough that you can throw them away to act as screens or body blockers as well. On top of that, we had 1 Nurgling Swarm as well to be good, I guess. It can sit back to protect the Greater Demons or simply just act as a utility unit. This list is super creative. More recently, we're seeing Chaos Demons kind of funneled down one direction or another, either focusing on single allegiance keywords to make use of those Greater Demon effects, or taking what I like to call the adventuring party of the Great Unclean One, Lords of Change, and Bloodthirst or Shalaxi Hellbane, with some other support Greater Demons that can teleport those guys around. Greater Demons each fit into kind of an MMORPG category, either like support, tank, DPS, for example, and if you take the right combination of them, they can be very effective. This list, however, it looks like is focusing much more on being a highly technical army with a ton of really useful units that can outscore the opponent rather than necessarily outfight them. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about them and which one is your favorite. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Everybody can be classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome to another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. I literally started recording so that you would come over and squeak earlier. I literally introed to try to fool you, and you didn't fall for it. Jesus Christ.